Whether you're dreaming of a retirement with sand between your toes and a cold one in your hand, hitting the road to chase the winds of adventure, or spending time with your grandchildren, this show is intended to help you get there. Welcome to Coasting in Retirement with your host, Josh Knoll. You've worked too hard throughout your career to spend your retirement worrying. So sit back, kick up your feet, because we've got lots of financial tips and tricks to share to help you get exactly where you want to be. Here's Josh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Coasting in Retirement. That's right. Thanks for joining us today. We are excited to have you. I'm your host, Josh Knoll, alongside co-host Michelle Lee Melton, the Batgirl to my Batman, helping this country boy sound out three-syllable words. How you doing,
Enunciate.
Michelle?
I am doing well.
Good to know. All right, it's cooled off a little bit, finally.
I know. Hallelujah.
Yeah, we needed that surface of the sun out there.
Woo.
Well, here we are once again in Coastal College's recording studio, beautiful downtown Fairhope, hatching up another great show for those of you tuning in. So, listeners, Michelle and I are here today to discuss financial topics relevant to those of you in or near retirement, living your best life along our part of the Gulf Coast. If you're just tuning into the show, we want to welcome you. You're listening to Lower Alabama's most dynamic financial radio show. At least we think so. So here's what we got in store for you today. First segment, deep dive on our topic of the day. Second segment, about 20 minutes past the hour, fan favorite, Michelle with the news of the week. That's right. Third segment, roughly 40 minutes past the hour, Josh's crystal ball and
Your big mouth.
big mouth. That's right. So buckle up. We got a lot to get to. Quick background on me for those of you new to the show. Again, my name is Josh Knoll. I'm a fee-based financial advisor. I hold my FINRA Series 65 securities license, and I am the owner of Gulf Coast Financial Advisors. That's an independent investment management and financial planning firm. We've got offices in Fairhope and Orange Beach, Alabama. You can find more information on me and Gulf Coast Financial Advisors by visiting our website, gulfcoastfa.com, or feel free to give us a call at 251-327-2124. Now, if you missed that contact info, do not worry. We repeat it several times throughout the show. All right, so Michelle.
Yes.
On our last episode, we did a thrilling and riveting deep dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly of Roth conversions and backdoor Roths. What are your thoughts on that?
It's very dry for me.
Like what's the kind of champagne that's dry?
Dry.
Dry champagne. Drier than that.
There's also champagnes that are extra dry.
Well, the Roth conversions would be considered extra dry.
It turns out that the extra dry champagnes are actually the sweeter ones.
Oh, is that right? Well,
Which sounds counterintuitive.
Well, we're going to make this episode sweet. So the Roth topic, very important to our audience, our listening audience. And listeners, if you did miss that episode about Roth conversions and backdoor Roths, you can find it on our website or just go and look on Spotify for Coasting in Retirement. But this week, the reason we bring it up, because this week we're going to stay in the same vein. We're going to talk about yet another somewhat dry concept, but it's a very important rule that has the potential to do some real damage to your retirement account if it is handled improperly. It's called the IRS Rule 72T.
T is not for tittillating, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately not. Now, the T is in parentheses, or is that colons? That'd be colons, right? 72T, the little colons?
No, those are parentheses.
Those are
Open
parentheses.
close parentheses.
Well, there you go. Yeah, thank
that's
you.
how you do citations.
Thank you, the one that knows how to do English here.
Yes.
Yeah, like I was telling my daughter, Josephine, earlier, I don't even know if I could pick out an adverb in a sentence anymore. I've just gotten
There's
way
a blue
beyond.
book of citations and everything.
There you go. All right, so IRS Rule 72T. Undoubtedly, there's some of you listeners right now, you're nodding your head. You're like, I know what that is. I know what a 72T
Do
is.
you?
Some do. And some of them, Michelle, obviously, a lot of them probably heard of it at a dinner seminar that advertised how to retire
Apparently
early.
That's a thing.
Early
Yeah.
retirement, right? We're going to talk about that. But for those of you that are tuning in that are not familiar with this concept, let's start with the basic definition. Rule 72T is a section of the IRS code that covers the exceptions and processes that allow you to withdraw money from your qualified retirement accounts before age 59 and a half and not pay the typical 10% early withdrawal penalty. Okay? So that doesn't sound too bad, right?
No, that sounds
Fine.
interesting. Yeah,
Well,
I'll bite.
Okay, well, that's what we're going to do. So as this, with anything that has this kind of, that talks about your retirement accounts, this has possibly a huge effect on your chances of outliving your money. And we need to definitely take a deeper look under the hood for how this thing really works. So first, when referring to this concept for sake of brevity, most people in my industry just call it 72T or Rule 72T. I have a hard time because of my overbite saying IRS over and over and over again. So we're just going to say 72T for the most part. But remember, that 72T part, it just refers to the part of the IRS code that allows for the early withdrawals without penalty. The actual mechanism that you use to calculate and facilitate these early withdrawals is called substantially equal periodic payments, or SEPP, SEPP for short. Okay. So, Michelle, that's two P's.
Two P's,
right?
two capital P's at the end.
That's right. So, and for the sake of clarity for our listeners and for Michelle to some degree, we're not referring to a SEPP IRA. SEPP in an IRA stands for Simplified Employee Pension. That's a form of qualified retirement plan, but it's not related to our discussion today.
Maybe next time.
So let's get back to SEPP. Now, I'm assuming this goes by SEPs. I should know this, but we're just going to say SEPPs for now. These substantially equal payments must be set up for a minimum of one withdrawal per year for 5 years, or until you reach age 59 and a half, whichever comes later, not first, whichever comes later, in order to avoid the 10% rule. So remember this fact, listeners, because we will circle back to it. There is a severe downside for screwing this part up. Now, let's talk about this. Michelle, why would someone want to access their retirement accounts before 59 and a half, you may ask?
Why not?
Well, so a positive reason.
Yeah.
Maybe an investor is in a position to retire early.
Maybe I'm buying a second home.
Maybe.
Money.
Well, maybe they're in a position to retire early, and because they hold most of their assets in qualified plans, they need a way to access those accounts without penalty. So typically, this, in general, somebody that's going to do this in that scenario it's going to involve a pretty healthy qualified plan account balance, or at least it should. And hopefully a qualified financial professional has run some type of long-term income calculations before they do the 72 or access the Rule 72T. And listeners, this does happen. People retire early all the time. We help people retire early. It's a thrilling thing when it's done properly, right? Unfortunately, though, as with many emergency situations because remember, Rule 72T technically it falls under the emergency situation. And as many times when you're accessing your retirement accounts early, the 72T is often used because an unexpected financial need or life change happened, such as a layoff from your job. Again, some of you all are nodding your head. You've been through this. Sometimes the guys that do the early retirement seminars tend to park their promotional materials right next to a large plant or employer that is having said layoffs. Mm-hmm. Trust me on this. Sometimes, and then also too, Michelle, sometimes people are just worn out from working a physically or mentally demanding job, and they want to retire early, but they do need the money from the qualified accounts to do so.
I want to retire early.
Well, okay. So, but whatever the case may be, this is where the shady characters come in.
Yeah,
That's
I don't know if I'll do 72T, though.
Well, that's when people are vulnerable. So we're going to talk about this. Before we get to the shady characters, though, let's talk about some of the rules and utilizing IRS Rule 72T. First, you've heard me say qualified plan now quite a bit. Qualified plan, in general, anything that the IRS gives some type of tax preferential treatment to. Think 401ks and IRAs. So with a 72, utilizing Rule 72, you need to involve certain types of qualified plans. Those are 401ks, 403bs, 457bs, or an IRA. It's a lot of jargon, Michelle.
Yeah, it looks like an algebra problem with all those numbers with letters next to them.
Truth. All right, so let's do a very quick explanation then on that jargon. 401ks and 403bs are very similar. Those are the pre-tax group plans, pre-tax contributions, tax-deferred growth, pay the taxes when you get into retirement. The difference being the 401k is for private companies, while 403bs are typically for government and nonprofits, like Michelle's real job when she's not making millions on this radio show. And then 457bs are for deferred compensation plans. All right, so that's the first rule. It's got to be a certain type of qualified plan. Second big rule, the retirement plan cannot be employer managed, which means you cannot take 72T early withdrawals from a retirement account you hold with your current employer. Okay, remember that. Third thing, you will still owe income taxes on your withdrawal amount at your current income tax rate with the 72T. Now, these three rules I just listed, it has to be a certain type of qualified account, can't be at your current employer, taxes will be due. These are all pretty easy to remember, right?
Sure.
Not bad. But so what I did was I got the easy stuff out of the way, and I saved the biggest brain damage rule of 72T for last because it does involve some math. Some would argue it involves fuzzy math.
Sketch.
Well, it's just fuzzy math. And if you screw it up, and it happens, the penalties are hefty. They're big. Yeah, you do not want to screw this up. So first, let's do this. Let's talk about your withdrawal amount. This will be determined by your IRS life expectancy table, which it's your job to determine which one applies to you. Common sense would tell you that if you want to, so let's do simple math here, Michelle. Common
Yay.
sense would tell you that if you wanted to withdraw a total of $50,000 from an account, a qualified plan account, over the course of 5 years, you would take $50,000 divided by 5, you would get
$10,000.
right. But of course, as with anything when it comes to taxes, it's not that simple.
Boo.
There are 3 IRS life expectancy tables that you're going to need to look at to see which one fits you. There is the uniform lifetime table, there's a single life, and there's a joint and last survivor, okay? You and I would be joint and last survivor, by the way. These tables revolve around whether you are married or not and how much of an age gap exists between you and your spouse. Michelle acts like we have a huge age gap. We do not. Okay.
I just think it's funny they had to make up that one for their to reflect that.
That they do, yeah. In case, for people to get married to, remarried to much younger people.
We've seen it happen.
It happens.
Yeah.
It happens. All right. So then, what happens next is the math part will kick in once you pick the correct life expectancy table. So as opposed to these tables, you do have some discretion when you pick the payout method. You can pick the one that best fits your situation. There are 3 basic SEPP distribution methods. There's one that you've all heard of if you're entering your retirement. The required minimum distribution, that's one choice. There is fixed amortization, or a lot of times it's just referred to as amortization. And then finally, there is fixed annuitization. And again, sometimes it's referred to as annuitization. And I'm going to tell you right now, it would absolutely put Michelle to sleep if I went through all the calculations of each of these methods. So
you guys can call Josh for that and set up an appointment.
100%. Let's just say this in general. Use the RMD method if you want to keep the withdrawal amount as low as possible. And then I think it's 100%, and that's one you can actually probably calculate on your own if you wanted to.
Yeah.
I do think it's fair, though, to say that you would be best served with a qualified financial professional and or a CPA to calculate the other two. Because remember what I said at the beginning of the show about making sure you don't screw this up. Here is why. If you modify, let's say you determine your life expectancy table, you pick your SEPP, and off you go. Yeah, you're going to do this. You're going to access Rule 72T. You're going to take early withdrawals, and you're going to access your qualified plan assets. If you were to do this and then modify your SEPP by taking an annual amount out that is different from the annual amount that you originally determined, you will be subject to both the 10% tax, early withdrawal tax, 10% tax on the total distributions in that calendar year, and a recapture tax that is equal to the total amount of the 10% penalty tax that would have been imposed for the prior years of the SEPP. And it gets worse, Michelle.
It does get worse.
Plus interest.
Buzzkill.
Because the IRS will treat it as if you were avoiding making that payment on a timely manner in your previous calculations.
All up
also,
in your biz.
too, pile on a little bit. Hefty fines apply if your calculations are off and your account doesn't have enough money to make the full 5 payments. For example, you come up short in funds in the 4th or 5th year, okay? A lot of those penalties still apply. That's honestly, that's why most people who successfully use Rule 72T, they tend to be closer to 59.5, meaning that they're not committing to more than a 5-year lockup period. Because remember, it's 59.5 or 5 years, whichever is later, not earlier. And also, they tend to have a substantial chunk of other money they can use for extra and unforeseen expenses. The idea is they do not have to change their fixed payment amount of the SEPP. All right, so Michelle, that's the basic rules of 72T. Right?
Easy peasy.
Yeah.
I got it.
Well, so if you're still a little confused, and listeners, if you're still a little confused, do not feel bad. It can be confusing, right? That's why you got to be careful when somebody tells you it's easy. Just like with with Roth conversions, the devil's in the details. You got to pay attention to this stuff. So what we're going to do, we're going to circle back to some of this information in our next 2 segments, and we're going to dive a little deeper to help you understand on a deeper level. So remember, 72T can be a convoluted path. There are downsides. There's upsides, but there are definitely downsides. There's landmines, if you will. And that's why it's so important to treat this concept with caution and deference and not get caught up in some fancy sales presentation about retiring early. So, in fact, Michelle, is on that note, in our next segment, we're going to discuss some of this chicanery and shenanigans around 72 transactions, including one of the most egregious examples ever that happened down here in
For shame.
Lower Alabama.
We're going to spill the tea. It's old news, though.
It is old news, thankfully, but it was a shockwave in this part of the world in the financial services industry. All right, so listeners, have you been thinking about utilizing IRS Rule 72T? Are you interested in a private conversation about your retirement options? Well, for a one-on-one confidential discussion about your investments or your financial plan, why don't you give us a call at 251-327-2124, or make an appointment on our website. That's gulfcoastfa.com. Let me spell that out for you. That's GULF, like the Gulf of Mexico, Coast, like in the show title, FA, and that stands for Financial Advisor. So gulfcoastfa.com. All right, folks, coming up next, every week, Michelle and I scour what she calls the interwebs for helpful financial articles related to our topic of the day, especially articles that pertain to those of you in or near retirement. So join us after the break to hear Michelle and I discuss this week's relevant headlines in our Michelle with the News of the Week segment. Do not turn that dial. Whether it's building a business from scratch with your own two hands and wanting to maximize the financial impact of those sacrifices, or growing a great nest egg by being a dedicated and reliable worker for years, or choosing to live a life well within your means in order to accomplish a lifelong dream of retirement, the last thing you want is to go with the wrong financial advice after you've worked so hard to accumulate your assets. You've also probably spent most of your life putting others' needs ahead of your own, and now it's your turn. We can help. Gulf Coast Financial Advisors is a locally owned, independent, fee-based financial planning, investment management, and tax planning practice. We have offices in Fairhope and Orange Beach. We serve all of Baldwin County and the Gulf Coast. We also have an easy-to-understand fee-for-service model with no sales quotas, no proprietary products. Our ultimate responsibility is to our clients' goals and dreams. You can reach us at 251-327-2124 or find us online at gulfcoastfa.com. That's GULF, like the Gulf of Mexico, Coast, FA as in financialadvisor.com. Welcome back to Coasting in Retirement. Your host, Josh Null here. So as we discussed before the break, every week Michelle and I scour the interwebs for helpful financial articles related to our topic of the day, special articles that pertain to those of you in or near retirement. Now, our job is to help you all understand how these headlines impact you, especially when it comes to your money. So without further ado, here's Michelle with the news of the week.
All right, Josh, let's get started with a recent article from USA Today simply titled, "What is Rule 72T?" Now, to be honest, up until last week's episode where you planted the seed that we were discussing 72Ts on this week's episode, I obviously never heard of it. And then I thought it was referring to the number of ages you had to be to
you thought
retire.
It was reference to like
and
an
then it made
RMD.
me sad because I would like to retire early. Maybe not with the 72T, though. Okay. So anyway, to my surprise, there's a ton of articles about this concept. Shocker. But I felt this particular USA Today article cut to the chase the best understanding. A lot of what we talked about in the opening segment you can found in this piece, but I was surprised to learn that basically anyone is eligible to use 72T, not just folks in their mid-50s or older, which should make you pause.
Right.
It seems to me that this could be enticing to someone younger with a 401k balance, but not a long-term outlook. So what are your thoughts? Mine are tread lightly.
Well, so remember this. I completely agree. And it is a great article. It's probably one of the best ones we found for kind of laying everything out in a sensible manner. But the number one thing to remember is this, because I dealt with this here recently on a couple of simple IRAs that I had. Retirement accounts are for the long run. They're for the long term. They're not for emergencies. They're not for accessing early in life. Let's put the 72T to the side. Accessing your qualified plans early, particularly if you're accessing a newer plan like a simple IRA that's within 2 years or less of being open, it's like the payday loan version of getting to your money. You're just burning money to the ground trying to get to it. So have that same, in my opinion, have that same focus or mindset for you all that are younger looking at this. It needs using the rule 72T needs to be done in a manner where it makes total sense, where there is an absolute calculation of future income needs, where you have put all the pieces of the puzzle on the table and put them together, hopefully with a qualified financial professional. We are financial advisors. We do financial planning at our firm. We have Will Stein, licensed CPA, so we can do tax planning. All those things come together. You need to have it all done as part of a financial plan, because what happens is, Michelle, we talked about this a little bit last week, is there's drawdown risk. Well, what does that mean? That means that anytime you take money out of an investment account, particularly we were talking about with Roth conversions, the example we had there was you got $1 million in your qualified account, you do a Roth conversion, you pay the taxes out of the balance, now you're left with $650,000. That is like drawdown risk to the extreme, because you can't just make 10% of a gain on $1 million is significantly more than 10% gain on $650,000. Do you understand where I'm going with this? So if you're trying to make up that balance, you're going to have to take more risk than what you're probably comfortable with, particularly if you're trying to get into retirement. And next thing you know, you got drawdown risk, you got sequence of return risk, and all of a sudden you're starting to run out of money when you're in your 70s because you pulled the trigger too early, okay? So that's definitely what I have to say when it comes about going into this. Now, on the flip side of that, as we talked earlier, Michelle, some people are absolutely in a position. We've helped clients retire early. They had most of their assets in qualified plans. They had an affordable lifestyle. They typically had low debt. They typically had access to other funds outside of their main accounts, but they needed that for this kind of the main part of it. And we were able to pull it off, and we were able to use Rule 72T. But as I've said many times before, and as we will see in this episode, Roth conversions and Rule 72Ts, all too often, there's too many people running out there in a sales process that is a hammer looking for a nail. Okay? All right. Very good article. It's going to be on the link will be on our website, listeners, if you want to find it. What's next?
Okay. Up next is a new site, ooh la la, that we haven't referenced before called Commonwealth. On their blog site, they have an article titled Are 72, I can't say that. It's hard for me to even say.
Rule 72T.
72T plans too good to be true.
That's a lot of tips.
It is.
Right.
And then hint, and in parentheses, for most of your clients, yes.
Right.
This article covers a lot of the same grounds as the USA Today article we just referenced, but I found one important part that we only touched on briefly. I think what gets lost in all of this conversation, you kind of just mentioned it though, is about using Rule 72T to retire early, is the fact that your retirement account is going to get drained earlier than if you waited to a more normal retirement age.
Right.
And I think, do they refer to that as being busted, the IRS?
Yes.
And I like that term because it's got some blackjack references, which cracked me up, and I like
well,
that.
what you can bust, the Rule 72T plan can bust if you don't stick the landing on the amounts or you run out of money.
Right.
The IRS actually says the plan is busted, which is hilarious that they use that word.
Yes, blackjack.
Right. Yeah, so, all right, so yeah, what are my thoughts? Well, so I want to be devil's advocate for a minute.
Okay.
I feel like I am pretty youthful for my age, right?
I agree with that.
Yep, and so are you.
Yes.
But I'm also very blessed. While I grew up running heavy equipment with my dad and his excavating business, I worked with my hands. As I've told Michelle many times, I've never been a tough guy, but I was a tough out when I was younger. I could work for hours on end, out in the heat, pouring concrete, doing all these things. I've been blessed that I was afforded the opportunity to go to college. I had the ability, genetically, God-given, whatever, to be able to do what I do for a living doing this. Which is basically the only muscle I sprain are the muscles around my mouth at this point. So the point of that is I get it that there are a lot of people that are completely worn out by the time they get to my age or even just a little bit older, and they want to retire. And especially when they've the most clear example I can give you is when somebody's worked kind of like a factory job for 20 or 30 years.
Standing up all day.
Oh my
doing
gosh.
the same repetitive
hips,
thing.
Hips are hurting, back's hurting. And they've done a great job of living an affordable lifestyle, and they put all this money away. In sometimes cases, Michelle, people come in $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million in their retirement account, and they've done that off of a relatively modest income because they've kept their expenses low. I get it. And so what we do is we are going to work through a comprehensive financial plan. We're going to do some income calculations with this, because if anybody deserves having a fair shot at seeing if a Rule 72 plan, accessing the Rule 72T will benefit you, that's you, who I just described. So, I know this episode sounds like we're trying to be a little bit of naysayers on it. We're not. What I'm trying to be is naysayers against some of the nonsense sales pitches that you all get, where they try to make it sound like everybody can retire early. That's not the case. It's got to be a specific example. And plus, you've got to remember, we're all living longer than we ever have. Doesn't mean we're living healthier, but we're living longer. So, yeah, great article. All right, what you got next?
All right. So on our last episode, we laid out the good, the bad, and the ugly of Roth conversions and backdoor Roths.
Yeah, can I jump in?
Sure.
Yeah, so that is episode 17. Mm-hmm. You can find that on the website, gulfcoastfa.com, or you can go to Spotify. You podcast listeners, all our previous episodes are there. Sorry to interrupt you, Michelle.
That's okay. It's your show. You specifically cited the shenanigans that unscrupulous salespeople and brokers use to convince folks to do a Roth conversion when it is not necessarily in their best interest. You also told me that a lot of nonsense happens in the 72T world as well, and the rest of us. And I must say you appear to be right. My research on the 72T led to many, many attorneys' blogs that listed several.
That's never a good sign.
No, it's not. That is bad. Several egregious examples of the Rule 72T abuse. One of the more interesting articles I found was on the website for Georgia-based the Perry Law Firm. Perry Page is what it was called, I think. And it was simply titled Early Retirement Scams. Here's what stuck out to me on that, whatever, the blog or their website. The brokers referenced in this article about Rule 72T scams and told their clients that they could withdraw 7 to 9% of their account every year,
Right.
saying they could do this for 30 years or more.
Right.
It doesn't make sense already. So I know you often talk about a 4 to 5% withdrawal rate and what it takes in earned interest to maintain just even that. So why in the world would someone promise that high of a rate? And then I think they all said, oh, you'll never run out of money.
You'll never run out of money.
When anybody says that, suspect.
It is. It should be a red flag, right? It's like if you were a cop and you pull somebody over and they say, I've just had one drink. That's just a red flag right off the bat, right? So on this, there's a couple different things here, Michelle. So first, why would they promise that high rate of return? Well, because they want to sell something and make a commission. I mean, that's really the bottom line. People got to remember that. Now, what's going on with these particular scams, and I feel like we need to do a little disclosure. We're not promoting the Perry Law Firm. We've never heard of them. They just happen to be in Georgia, but they had a really good article talking about these different types of scams. What they're saying in these things, now typically, and again, it's going to sound like I'm throwing shade here, Michelle, I am not, but typically these are going to involve annuity sales. I do annuities. We've talked about it multiple times on our show. They have a purpose. There are different kinds of annuities that do different things.
We're going to talk about them again later on.
We're going to talk about it later again. But what happens with some of these is they take these products and they will show these withdrawal rates of 79% coming out, or sometimes they deal with variable annuities. Sometimes they just deal with investment accounts. But the problem is for that to continue on and on and on and on. And there are certain guarantees in some of these annuity products, particularly with the deferred income annuities. But the problem with an investment account, if you're going to withdraw 7 to 9% by math alone, you've got to be making 11 to 14%. To make 11 to 14% retirement means you're probably taking on more risk than you really should be in general. Okay, so. And then the last thing, Michelle, what you'll see on some of this funny business, and we'll circle back to this too, is that, and we're going to talk about in my crystal ball and big mouth part, but
yeah.
I just heard a radio show over the weekend talking about, I can guarantee you a certain rate. And folks, you got to remember this. There is a huge difference when people are telling you they can guarantee you a certain rate of return, especially if they say it's 7 to 9%. Here's the gray area that they're operating in. There is a significant difference when you're talking about return of your money versus return on your money. Because when you hear 7 to 9%, you're hearing return on your money. You're thinking, okay, great, I'm making 7 to 9% of my money every year. That's not what they're referring to. They're talking about returning your money to you with the draw rate. And then a lot of times what they'll do is they'll point to an income rider that has a guaranteed increase every year. Ugh. And that's the number they're using that's saying you're getting that additional amount. And the problem is it's a gray area. It's not that, in many cases, it's not that they're just outright lying. I'm not trying to throw shade at everybody, but I do think there's some intentionality because they know that more often than not, the end user, the client, the customer in this scenario is hearing that as 7 to 9 or a big number return on their investment. And that's just not the case. That's not how it works out. We can show you how that actually works. It's, we like to do diagrams. We like to get the whiteboard out. I can show you what they actually are saying. Just give us a call, 251-327-2124. Make an appointment, and we will walk through that. Very good. Got another one?
Yes, the last one, and this is the one you warned us about ahead of time. It is one of the most egregious examples of the Rule 72T fraud, and it happened right here in our own backyard. But I was still shocked at the severity of it. It was pretty sad and made me angry. But this article is from Investment News and is titled Scammed Exxon Mobil Retirees Applaud Sentencing of Ex-Securities America Rep. The broker's name is David McFadden, and apparently he lived in Orange Beach, but somehow ran a financial services company 2 states away in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
And I can't prove this. I want to be very careful because this is obviously a very serious topic, but I do think he did some business in Mobile as well. I reserve the right to be wrong on that statement, but that kind of makes more sense with him being based, living in Orange Beach. So,
right.
Pardon the interruption.
Okay. So according to the article, over 150 of McFadden's clients lost tens of millions on his fraudulent early retirement scheme that utilized, guess what? IRS Rule 72T. So I did a little bit more digging, and on the FBI's website, FBI
like the Federal Bureau of...
It's tragic. You can find the sentencing announcement. So of course I read it. Not only did McFadden falsely promote his qualifications as a CPA and a financial planner, but he also admitted that he falsely represented to his clients that they had enough money to retire using IRS Rule 72T to make early withdrawals, saying that the variable annuity he was selling was totally in their best interest.
Right.
For sure. You don't have to worry about anything. It's fine. So this article is heartbreaking, and the stuff is complicated, and I can see how people can get misled, especially when you're looking forward to retiring, you know? And these ExxonMobil, they probably had some hefty money.
Oh, I bet.
You know, saved up.
They're probably what we were talking about earlier with the factory worker example.
Right.
You know, living a modest lifestyle, working there 20, 30 years.
Or the oil rig people that are
right.
out there in the ocean,
Heck
Gulf.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, you know, I love it when somebody comes in, you know, driving a pickup truck, got, you know, $1.5 million, $2 million in their account, living a very modest lifestyle. That's my people, man. I love it. So anyway, all right. So let's talk about the sad thing about David McFadden. First, here's the thing. If you all do look, the links will be on there.
Oh, yeah.
I can tell you, for right, wrong, or indifferent, for somebody to get 5 years of prison in financial advising, yeah, usually you'll see that with more like the higher level investment management stuff, but that means
like Bernie Madoff stuff.
It's got to be pretty bad to get 5 years. I mean, that means, and if I understand
and the
correctly,
judge
throughout
reamed him.
Right, throughout. I think he threw out the suggested sentencing.
Oh, he did. He totally ignored it. He's like, oh no, because it was tiddlywinks.
Right. So here's my experience. I moved down here 9 years ago from Missouri, and I didn't know anybody around here. Was fortunate enough. I want to keep this story very broad, Michelle. I don't want to, in case the person's listening. But very early in my career, I was asked to join by an advisor that I worked with to come sit in on a couple that had come in, and were talking about what had happened to their early retirement. Didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about McFadden. Didn't know any of this stuff. But basically, and I'll keep this very broad explanation, the man of the couple, they've been married for decades. He had sold his business, been convinced he could retire early using Rule 72T. The lady had a full-time job. She was told that she could retire. They lived a modest lifestyle. Memory serves me correct, Michelle, when they pulled the trigger, they had 1.5 million, 1.2 to 1.5 million, called $1 million plus in their retirement account.
Okay.
Fast forward 10 years. They're now down to 250,000. They are now mid to late 60s, I remember. Well, let's do the math. They would have been, yeah, they're early 60s.
I think it was 60.
Yeah, he convinced them to do this in their early 50s. They're now, and I don't know if they're part of the lawsuit or not, so I want to be very careful. I want to tread very carefully
Most
here.
likely.
But I can tell you they were devastated. I mean, it was horrible. In fact, I ran my mouth in the meeting. I was so mad, and I have a big mouth.
Shocker.
Yeah, big mouth. And the older advisor's like, hey, you
just moved here, doesn't know anybody.
Yeah, I was like, hey, he doesn't know about this guy. So that was my first experience. That's kind of how he got on my, and here's the sad thing. We talk about annuities on this show. We talk about the income annuities. We talk about MIGAs. We'll go back to all that.
SPIAs.
Yeah, this is why this is a very acute example of how annuities get a bad rap. I mean, this is nonsense. It's
right.
Junk. So,
And also a sad part is that both of those individuals had to go back to work.
They both had to take part-time jobs.
Yeah.
And it was part-time. It was because he was a very he did a good job with his business. It was sad. So Michelle asked, how can you avoid this? If it sounds too good to be true, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just remember what your grandpa and grandma told you.
I think anybody guarantees anything, then you should.
In my line of work, if somebody guarantees you a rate of return on your money, outside of fixed income investments that we talked about on previous episode, there are very valid fixed income investment, money market accounts, money market funds, MIGAs, bank CDs, all these things from reputable sources that give you a guaranteed return. But that guaranteed return is not going to be 9, 10, 11, 12%. Right now, it's back into pretty competitive rates at 4 or 5%. But even that's usually not somebody's going to go around bragging on that. So, all right. Well, very good. Is that it?
That is it for those.
All right. Well, great job, as always, with the headlines. These are all important pieces of information that we believe impacts those of you in or near retirement. So listeners, again, if you have questions around these topics in our headlines, or if you get just questions about your investment strategy or financial plan, you can set a confidential, one-on-one, no pressure, no fee, no nonsense, as I hope you can tell, appointment by calling us at 251-327-2124, or you can go to the website gulfcoastfa.com. That's GULF Coast, FA as in financial advisor.com. And in the upper right-hand corner, there's a link to my calendar. Again, just click there, get on my calendar. We'll have a conversation. Again, no pressure, no obligation. It's free. We're just going to talk. We're going to, at the end of the day, my job is to make sure if we do business, I leave you better than I found you. That's really how we work. So, all right, folks, coming up next, Josh's crystal ball and big mouth. What have been some of my predictions? Have I been right? Was I ever wrong? How wrong? What do I think? We'll find out. What do I think is going to affect investors in the near or maybe even distant future? So we get to talk about all of these things and poke a little fun at my big mouth. Stay tuned. Whether it's building a business from scratch with your own two hands and wanting to maximize the financial impact of those sacrifices, or growing a great nest egg by being a dedicated and reliable worker for years, or choosing to live a life well within your means in order to accomplish a lifelong dream of retirement, the last thing you want is to go with the wrong financial advice after you've worked so hard to accumulate your assets. You've also probably spent most of your life putting others' needs ahead of your own, and now it's your turn. We can help. Gulf Coast Financial Advisors is a locally owned, independent, fee-based financial planning, investment management, and tax planning practice. We have offices in Fairhope and Orange Beach. We serve all of Baldwin County and the Gulf Coast. We also have an easy-to-understand fee-for-service model with no sales quotas, no proprietary products. Our ultimate responsibility is to our clients' goals and dreams. You can reach us at 251-327-2124 or find us online at gulfcoastfa.com. That's GULF, like the Gulf of Mexico, Coast, FA as in financialadvisor.com. Welcome back. Your host, Josh Knoll here, alongside co-host Michelle Lee. So, folks, I'm opinionated. I tend to have strong opinions at times. And in my defense, I would say a radio show host that isn't opinionated probably wouldn't be very interesting to listen to. Right,
Wet
Michelle?
towel.
Wet towel, wet blanket. Also, I am paid, obviously, in my profession to offer professional guidance and opinions to my clients. Otherwise, what use would I be? So sometimes I feel so strongly about something that I talk about it publicly. I don't talk politics publicly, but I do talk investments and money publicly, various podcasts and radio shows I've had in the past. And sometimes I'll even make some predictions. And while I feel like I'm usually proved right, because
Of course you would.
I'm fairly, I'm a very positive person, but
are.
I have a skeptical viewpoint of some of the nonsense out there. So, and of course, with that, sometimes I do swing and miss. So if you want to hear me beat my chest or maybe eat a little crow, let's get at it with Michelle's, with Josh's crystal ball and big mouth. All right, Michelle, what's first?
Okay. So this one, I like this one.
All right.
So you stated that you thought the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, went to a Grateful Dead show, which he did, so would take a hawkish tone towards inflation in his recent speech at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which would result in mild to medium stock market sell-off. So you got the first right part. In his speech, Powell noted that while inflation has tumbled, I don't know about that, but in recent months, it isn't yet at an acceptable level, and that the central bank is prepared to do whatever it takes to bring inflation down to the 2% target. However, you got the second part about a market sell-off wrong. While the major indexes broadly fell that day, the market rallied in the afternoon and has continued a mild rally over the past few days. So, I have two questions. One, why do you think the market is ignoring Powell's stance? And two, what does your crystal ball say about the market moving forward?
Okay, so first, none of this makes any sense, really, because this is a prime example, Michelle, of why I don't day trade or try to time the market. Right?
Okay.
I don't have that skill. I don't have that temperament. I don't have that interest because
You don't have that crystal ball.
I don't because the stock market in general tends to be emotionally driven in the short run. And then, in my opinion, because I'm a fundamentalist when it comes to stock market, fundamentals come back into play over the long run. So trying to gauge this stuff in the short run, I made the prediction because it seemed common sense to me. But you're correct. The market that day had a broad sell-off, and then it rallied. It has rallied since then. My opinion, and we talked about this in the past, is more likely than not it was a very small handful of companies that were carrying the rally. We have yet to see a broad-based rally across the major indexes. That would be S&P 500, NASDAQ, things like that. What we've had is like an Apple and Facebook and Tesla and NVIDIA. We've had a very concentrated rally on some of these companies now that are worth many billions and sometimes, in Apple's case, many trillions of dollars that have kind of, the market is overweighted in certain companies is what it's called, okay?
Gotcha.
So now back to the point of what he's had to say. I don't know if people are, maybe they've been listening to me too long and they're overly, glasses half full, because he was not that optimistic. It was not a very uplifting.
It wasn't a pep rally?
It was not a pep rally. I mean, he did acknowledge that inflation was down, but he's like, hey, we're not going to stop until we got this thing beaten to the ground. And as always, I've done this many times, I still question, why are we targeting 2%? I don't understand, and these guys are so much smarter and more knowledgeable about this stuff, but I don't know why they are so hung up on 2%.
I don't know if they are.
Because I think we were Goldilocks on that 2% inflation for a long time. We may not see that for a while, and that's okay. We can make it work. The problem is what with the market, it's ignoring a lot of these signs. I'm not here, listeners, telling you that I'm not a bull or a bear kind of guy. The markets tend to go in its own cycle. And again, I'm a fundamentalist over the long run. Do the underlying stocks have revenue? What is their profit and loss? What's their EBITDA? What are the actual math that goes into the valuation of each individual company? That's what excites my nerd heart. Not this stuff like this, but I do think that the market is being a little silly about ignoring what he's saying, because we got more rate hikes coming. Period. I mean, to get to 2%. I don't know. Kind of wears me out a little bit.
Yeah.
All right. So like you said, my crystal ball and big mouth was off. Well, I was just off. I swung and missed. That's all it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Here you go. That's why I don't day trade.
At the end. Okay.
All right.
All right. So, Josh, you've stated many times it was just a matter of time before one of the financial regulatory bodies, either the SEC or FINRA, would put significant pressure on state insurance commissioners to clean up some of the, quote, guaranteed return language we spoke about used by some salespeople when pushing certain annuity products, such as fixed index annuities. But based on some publicly produced content we've heard recently, that doesn't appear to be the case, with several reference to a guaranteed rate of return with no downside. So tell us why you think these types of statements are so misleading, but also let us know why your big fat mouth missed so badly when spouting out that opinion.
Okay, so there's some meat on the bone here. All right, first, even saying that the SEC or FINRA was going to get into fixed insurance, when I would state that opinion, that just shows my ignorance, because they got their hands full with securities and variable products. They should put pressure, because apparently the state insurance commissioner is too busy looking other ways and ignoring some of the stuff that's said about guaranteed returns. So let's do this. Here's the meat on the bone. Let's talk about the different types of annuities that play into this. Michelle mentioned fixed index annuities. Listeners, really quick, if you want to hear our discussion on annuities, just go to our previous catalog on GulfCoastFA.com on the podcast tab, or find us on Spotify. Look for the annuity one. We talk about all the different ones. So to be fair, there are guaranteed rates offered in FIAs and MIGAs. That's fixed index annuities and multi-year guaranteed annuities. But those guaranteed rates, I'm talking about the rate of return, are going to be typically similar to the rates you would find in other fixed interest rate investments. Call it the 3 to 4% range, because it's not, here's the one thing is for sure, it's not the implied type of higher stock market based returns, say 7 to 9%. That's not what it should be referring to. So you can get guaranteed rates of return, just like you can get guaranteed rate of return on a bank CD inside some of these. Like you and I discussed last couple episodes ago on a MIGA, Michelle, that we had one at one time was a 5.45 rate for a 7-year lock. We haven't seen that since then, or at least I haven't. But that's an example of a guaranteed rate, okay? Now, of course, it's guaranteed based on the strength of the underlying insurance company, but insurance companies tend to be pretty long-standing now. They tend to be pretty strong compared to, call it 100 years ago. Why is this a problem? We talked about this earlier in an episode. You got to remember that when they're making these guarantees, they're referencing a couple different things. One, when they say no downside, typically in a fixed index annuity, if you've ever heard the term zero is your hero, what it means is you're exchanging some limit on your upside potential in exchange for a stopgap on your downside fall. What does that mean?
What does that mean?
Okay. So if you do a fixed index annuity, it is going to track some type of index we'll call it, for sake of discussion or clarity, the S&P 500. It is not in a fixed index annuity. Remember, it's fixed product. It is not a variable product. It is going to track this stock index, but it's not going to actually own securities. That's why insurance people can sell them, and you don't have to have a securities license. So it's going to track this index. So let's say the S&P 500. It's going to say, hey, we will give you participation in the S&P 500 if the S&P 500 is up, call it 10% or 12% or 20% or whatever it is for the year. We're going to give you 8% participation, 10% participation. We're going to keep whatever's left over on the top, okay? So let's say the S&P 500 is up 10%, your cap rate is 8%, insurance company pockets the cool 2%, off you go, right? Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
In exchange for you losing the cream off the top, if the S&P or whatever index is being tracked goes below, it has a negative value, we're going to stop you at 0%. Technically, you can't lose money, okay? So that's what they mean by that. That's not a dishonest statement. It sounds like I'm picking on all you annuity guys. I sell annuities. I'm not. I'm just telling you, you want to be crystal clear on this stuff, particularly with the complicated products that are out there. And then the other thing, Michelle, when they're talking about the return of 7 to 9%, usually they're talking about withdrawal rate. A lot of these things will have income riders that will guarantee a higher payout each year. But again, that's not saying the same as return on principal. And there are lifetime guarantees in these things, but you've got to be careful with them. You got to make sure you got the right type of annuity because they can get underwater. You can damage your ability to get the payout rate that you're looking for, especially when there's multipliers involved. I highly if you all are looking at any of these things and you just want a no BS conversation about them, give us a call, 251-327-2124. I am a fan of certain products. I'm a fan of certain companies. They've come through for some of my clients, but that doesn't mean I'm going to treat them any different than any other choice we have out there in determining what is the best fit for your situation. Okay. So, all right. Very good.
Okay. Next up, something we touched on last week, investment clients' best interest legislation. As we discussed, the Department of Labor has worked for years to institute rules around fiduciary requirements, continue to push forward with their current version called the Conflict of Interest in Investment Advice Rule. While the DOL has had certain issues getting past various lawsuits, the SEC's similar action called Regulation Best Interest, or Reg BI for short, which sounds like a medical term to me.
Right. I'm sorry, you have Reg BI.
Yes.
No, we have a pill for it.
Yeah. So that was actually implemented way back in June of 2020. You said that all of those rules related to being a fiduciary, acting on your client's best interests and either eliminating or spelling out conflicts of interest would result in more and more commission-based brokers and broker-dealer reps moving towards the fee-for-service model. In some cases, even dropping their FINRA registration required to collect any type of commission. So this seems like a lot of position and posturing.
And jargon.
More jargon. GI jargon. So, GIBI. So please enlighten if you feel your big mouth was right, and if so, what all this even means to the everyday investor.
So let's cut through and clarify, right? So there is a ton of jargon there, but it's important. And there's going to be some of you all listening that recognize a lot of the things we just said, especially if you're in in the financial services industry. So let's parse through everything that Michelle just said there. There was a push that started roughly during the Obama presidency to get what kind of a broad-based application of fiduciary standards when it came to investment advice, particularly around retirement plans, qualified plans, 401ks, IRAs, right? There also was a push to address conflicts of interest. What does that mean? That means very simply, if you are in a commissionable world, if let's do this, Michelle, let's do a little exercise. If I have two mutual funds to sell you, and on mutual fund, and they do roughly the same thing, but mutual fund A pays me 7% commission, and mutual fund B pays me 5%. Which one all I have to say is it was suitable to your situation, which one am I going to sell you if I'm acting in my own self-interest?
The one that gives you more commission.
Bingo. All right. So now, if you eliminate the commissions from that conversation, if you say, hey, there's going to be a level fee paid on all types of transactions, most of you all will recognize a 1% advisor fee, then mutual fund or ETF A, B, C, X, Y, Z, I don't care because none of them pay me. I'm getting paid directly by the client, and the client pays me the equal amount no matter which bucket of funds or products I pick. Okay? Make sense, listeners?
Yes.
All right. Then, so what happened with these big push to get everybody to that direction to where it was trying to level the playing field, the Department of Labor came first, which is funny because it's 3 or 4 years behind being implemented, where the SEC's the Reg BI, Regulation Best Interest, came in. They are just now, Michelle, just so you know, and this is really important, they are just now starting to enforce it. They gave everybody a long period of time to kind of adjust to the different rules. I don't know if the industry's adjusted or not. I would imagine that there's going to be some headaches still with broker-dealer reps and commission-based brokers. And what all this does is it just continually pushes everybody to the fee-for-service model. What's fee-for-service? You can charge a percentage of management fee for the amount of assets you're managing. For example, manage $100,000, charge 1%. That's $1,000 annually that you're paying your advisor to manage your money. Okay, makes sense? You can charge financial planning fees. You can charge by the hour. That's fee-for-service. And it doesn't mean that it's perfect. I mean, there's nonsense that goes on in the fee-for-service world as well, especially when you have somebody that is not checking the fine print and not looking at all of the dotted I's and the crossed T's, and maybe they're getting charged more than they necessarily need to be, right? So I was, back to your question, the original question. Yeah, I was right on.
Okay.
Yeah, the industry's heading that way, period.
Bingo.
You'd have to be silly to not realize that.
Okay. So the last one. You said that a combination of uncertain stock market conditions, continuing stock market volatility, and an aging population would lead to an increase in annuity sales. Well, according to a fresh-off-the-press article from Financial Advisor magazine, annuity sales did indeed jump to $183 billion. Wow,
that's a big number.
In the first half of 2023, which is a 27% increase over last year. So that sounds like good news. The article goes on to state that increased sales was pretty much across the board, with significant sales increases in fixed index annuities, multi-year guaranteed annuities called MIGAs, and my personal favorite, single premium immediate annuities, or SPIA.
Yeah, they're your favorite because you like saying SPIA, not because
I do.
Yeah, right.
Not because I use them, guys and gals.
Right.
I just like saying it. Okay. The only type of annuities that missed the boat were what?
Variable annuities.
Boom.
Right.
Okay. Or VAs, which is another abbreviation that doesn't seem to fit here.
Right, I know.
Yeah, okay.
So many abbreviations.
Yes. So obviously your crystal ball forecast was correct, but did you anticipate annuity sales going up that much?
No, I didn't. I mean, that's 27% increase. No. And here's what it does, though. It definitely goes against the narrative that annuities are fading away or that annuities are old news or whatever.
Right.
They're not. And here's why. Again, folks, you got to remember when somebody just lays it on the table, annuities are bad. Well, what annuity are you talking about? Because if you're talking about multi-year guaranteed annuity that gives you a certain interest rate over a period of time, you got to tell me why that's bad. What am I missing here if that fits somebody's situation? If you're talking about, like Michelle talked about, SPIAs, single premium immediate annuities, then you're also saying that for the most part, anybody that clicks on a pension, that's bad too, because you're showing your ignorance when you say those broad statements. Now, to be fair, as we've detailed in this show, the problem is there's a lot of knuckleheads in our industry that misuse annuities.
Full of knuckleheads.
It drives me nuts. So if we could just figure out a way to get it to where everything is open and honest, and people know exactly what they're getting into, and it's not pie in the sky, that's fine, and not get misled. But this increase in sales just shows you that annuities still are very valued by the consumer. They serve a purpose. $183 billion is no joke, right? But the main thing is, y'all just do the research. Try to find somebody that you trust to have this conversation. If you are looking at an annuity, we're not perfect here at Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, but we try to be just as to the point and open and honest as we can be. So, all right, Michelle, is that it?
That is all, folks.
All right. So, listeners, I hope you enjoyed a peek behind the curtain on how I form my opinions and predictions. And more importantly, especially in this episode, I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. So, now to our listeners that you have more questions about the various investments and topics we discussed in this segment, if you want to have a one-on-one, free, no pressure, no sales nonsense conversation, just reach out to us, 251-327-2124. Or, again, you can make an appointment on our website, gulfcoastfa.com. That's GULF, like the Gulf of Mexico, Coast, FA is a financialadvisor.com. Click in the upper right-hand corner to make an appointment on our website. All right, folks, that's it for us here this week in Coaster in Retirement. I want to give a huge thank you to my lovely co-host, Michelle Lee Melton.
Very welcome.
Yes, good job. Thank you to our awesome radio station, FM Talk 106.5 out of Mobile. Many thanks to the provider of our show music. That's local band Sloth Racer. Sloth is in the slow mammal, but the music is not slow. And always my sincere appreciation for all of you out there that have been listening and joining us on this journey. We would love to be a part of your financial journey as well. Till we talk again next Sunday, have a wonderful and productive week. This has been Coasting in Retirement with Josh Knoll.
Advisory services offered through Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, a federally registered investment advisor. Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, 6201 College Boulevard, 7th floor, Overland Park, Kansas, 66211. Prime Capital Investment Advisors, LLC, doing business as Prime Capital Wealth Management and Qualified Plan Advisors and Gulf Coast Financial Advisors are not affiliated. Gulf Coast Financial Advisors, Prime Capital Investment Advisors, Prime Capital Wealth Management, and Qualified Plan Advisors do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. This content has been prepared for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for tax, legal, or accounting advice. The information provided herein is not a complete analysis of every material fact regarding any strategy. It is intended only to provide insight into the opinions of the author. All information presented is for educational purposes only and is not an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any securities. Content offers commentary and generalized research, not personalized investment advice, and is for informational purposes only and does not constitute a complete description of our investment services or performance. All investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Be sure to first consult with a qualified legal professional and/or tax professional before implementing any strategy discussed here.